Okay, we're going to go ahead and convene this committee meeting of the Budget and Audit meeting on Tuesday, February 4th at 3 o'clock p.m. If the clerk could please call the roll.
Thank you. Councilmember Jennings. Here. Councilmember Chenier. Here. Councilmember Guerra.
Here.
And for the record, Mayor Steinberg will be absent.
Good, thank you. The quorum is present, so we'll commence with the first item, Madam Clerk.
First item is your consent calendar, and you have one item, the City Auditor's Activity Report for the second quarter of fiscal year 2019-2020.
Do we have any members of the public signed up to speak?
We do not.
Is there a motion from the?
There is a motion.
It's been moved by Councilmember Jennings, seconded by Councilmember Chenier. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, consent calendar passes. All right, Madam Clerk, what's the next item?
The second item is your discussion calendar. Item number 2 is the City Auditor's proposed audit plan for fiscal year 2020-2021.
Good afternoon, members of the Budget and Audit Committee. Jorge Segura, your City Auditor. The recommendation that is before you is that you pass a motion accepting the City Auditor's audit plan for fiscal year 2020-2021 and that you forward to the City Council for final approval. As we've done in our prior years, we've gone through a process of trying to identify areas for us to audit in the upcoming fiscal year. That includes conducting a citywide risk assessment, making inquiries into management and into our elected officials as to what might be areas of interest for us to focus our audit efforts on. And based on the information that we received and the analysis that we conducted, we're proposing the following items as our work plan for fiscal year 2020-2021. The audits that are currently in progress are as follows. We're doing an audit of green efforts. We're doing an audit of cannabis business permitting. We're looking at the Code Enforcement Division. We also recently initiated an audit of the Roberts Family Development Center. We're also looking at the Downtown Streets team, and we're looking at the emergency medical services. We did initiate an audit of animal care services, but that audit is now being postponed as a result of one of my staff resigning to watch over her recently born child.
Please wish her congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, I will. I will. The one that's postponed is the animal care services audit. Yes, will do. Beautiful baby boy, doing very well. Yes. Audits that are being carried over from the prior year are an audits of parks operations. We're also going to be looking at maintenance services division, the Office of Investigations within the police department, the accounting division within the finance department, the information technology department, and recycling and solid waste. We also have on our list a review of cannabis management and the security and emergency preparedness of the utilities department, body-worn cameras within the police department, and procurement services for the utilities department. Priority 2 audits, which are audits that we don't have the resources to do, but that we think would be of interest to the council, are reviewing the building division within the community development department and citywide grants management. For our research and analysis division, we noted in our proposed plan that we are currently looking at the 2020 community survey. We're also going to be doing our 2020 employee diversity, equity, and inclusion report. Annual reviews that we do will be the 2021 community survey, the 2021 employee diversity and equity and inclusion report. We're gonna review the ethics commission and the police commission. Also under the research and analysis division, we're gonna plan to look at conducting a financial conditions review, which is something that we're already engaged in right now. We would like to do a risk assessment of the city's revenue sources and an audit of the transient occupancy tax. I believe that's a full plate for us. It will keep us busy for the remainder of this year and well into the next fiscal year. I'm available to answer any questions, should you have any.
Any questions from the council? Wait, first of all, do we have members of the public signed up to speak? Councilmember Chenier.
Thanks. Thank you, Jorge. Couple questions that I think would be important as we go. So maybe just going back a little bit, I'm hoping that we can sometimes, and I'm sure in your scopes, you have more detail than we're seeing in the item here. But for example, on Roberts Family Development, I'm assuming it's pretty specific to our contracts.
That's correct.
With them, right? And so on this and other contracts, I'm hoping that part of the audit is looking at the city and saying, are we asking the right questions in our RFPs? And are we setting the right standards?
That's correct.
Because I don't think we do in some cases. We have RFPs go out, but they may be a little bit too broad in a lot of ways. So I'm just using that as an example, but I think in a lot of these, being as specific as we can about the goals of whatever it is we're looking at, whether it's a department, a division, or a grant, and then backing up into that of, are we reaching those goals?
Right.
Would be important. And do we do a good job monitoring what we're spending funds on?
The oversight component?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So really keeping that, to me, that's always the focus of what we should be doing, what you should be doing within the audits
Yeah,
themselves.
and our hope in that particular engagement is to cover both aspects of what you described.
Okay.
Both, from the city's perspective in regards to the process for selecting, awarding, and monitoring the awards that have been given to specifically the Roberts Family Development Center. And then from the recipient's perspective, how did they use the money? Was it in accordance with our contracts? And did we get the expected results that we were looking for?
Yeah. So my hope is that the audits that you do can be utilized if we want to go back at an organization and give them more money, right?
Sure.
Right. Okay.
Sure.
Couple other things. On the IT part, which I think is really important, particularly now, and I'm forgetting which city just got paralyzed. I mean, I'm assuming that the scope of that is very specific to cybersecurity and where we are. I don't know that there's anything more
Yeah,
important.
Atlanta went through a pretty
Atlanta, right.
significant
Yeah.
issue where,
There was one like last week that got shut down completely, yeah.
yes, and that's kind of what we have in mind. Obviously, those are pretty complicated engagements, and so we'll try to bite off a piece that is reasonable.
And do
for
we
us
have
to-
the expertise for that in-house, or is that's a contract out?
We would try to do what we can in-house, and if, based on what we see, we feel like there is outside expertise that is necessary, we would come back to council and ask for that additional resources.
Okay, and then the other piece, so I'm a little worried, this is a really large agenda that you've got, so I'm a little worried about your office capacity
Yeah.
to do all of this. So I think, and so that's one thing, I don't know if you want to address that. You feel like you have, obviously you've put this forward, so I don't want to ask a stupid question here, but do you feel like you have enough capacity to
I
accomplish
think it's
all this?
ambitious. Obviously, one of the things that complicates our ability to address all of the things that we've proposed is when we have unanticipated projects that are added during the course of the year onto our workload. And so then that causes things to have to be postponed, and we're trying to deal with that and catch up with that. The other aspect that obviously complicates completing the entire work plan as proposed are attrition. And we have had some absences that we've had to deal with that impact our ability to complete the projects proposed. I think if we are fully staffed and we are able to dedicate those resources to the projects listed within, we should be able to at least initiate what we have proposed here.
Okay.
But obviously, there's a a lot of additional areas that might be of interest to the council that we would have to then consider and shuffle if necessary.
Right. Well, let me just say one thing then around the capacity piece. One is just on your research and analysis audits on the ad hoc pieces. On the TOT one, I think the most important thing probably at this point is looking at Airbnbs and how we're doing with that. I know there's a lot of interest on the council. We've had
Sure.
some challenges in the neighborhoods. There's more legislation that will be going on, so being specific about that. On the first two, particularly the first one, so we just have this report coming sometime soon. Ms. Milstein can probably help us. Oh, it's with you, with Management Partners.
That's correct.
So how will what you're doing here differ from what we're going to see? And is it worth, I know they're building the model for us.
Correct.
Is it worth waiting on this? And I don't know how far you've gotten along in it, but waiting on this until the council can kind of digest what's in the Management Partners, start playing around with the model as we do our forecasting before we kind of loop back and do more work. So I'm looking for places where we may be duplicating the work that we've got.
Yeah, we've taken that into consideration, and our effort is definitely not to duplicate efforts, especially given that, Management Partners is about to present on it, incidentally. What we have planned for a date for the presentation is March 10th at the special session that we're having at 2 o'clock. So that's when that information would come forward. The model as is currently produced by Management Partners is a financial model that will help us do long-range forecasting for what we anticipate in terms of revenues and expenditures. What we are proposing in this financial condition assessment would be something that would allow us to identify pertinent performance metrics that the city would want to track and monitor going forward, assess how we currently stack up when looking at those performance metrics and comparing it to other cities, to get a sense of where we might be and where we might be going in the future in regarding to our financial viability. And so it's a little different than the forecast itself, because this would be more of an establishment of key metrics for us to track versus the actual financial model.
I thought, we just had someone walking, I thought that's what we're doing though, developing the metrics for what we do.
That's operationally, he's talking about for each revenue source, which I'm not sure is a valid.
All right. I guess my thing on this one, Mr. Chair, would be that I think after hearing Management Partners, after having those discussions within the council, that would be probably a better time to have a larger discussion about where that focus should be on something like this before you get too far down the road. So my suggestion, I don't know about the risk assessment piece, but on the financial condition, I would rather put a hold on it until we get the Management Partners and see where we are, because my guess is that a lot of questions will arise out of that, and that may be a different set of workload.
Sure.
So, Mr. Chair, I don't know what you think of that. It's only a month or two.
Sure, it's about a month.
Month and a half delay.
Okay.
But we just kind of wait on this piece and see what it is that's going to be most of interest to the council.
And in an effort also not to be duplicative,
Yeah.
that we can be.
Right.
We can.
Yeah, because there's no question there's going to be follow-up on that.
Yeah.
And so,
This was one that had previously been approved on our work plan. So we had initiated it
Right.
because it was already on there.
no, I understand. I think that was probably when we first approved it before we did the Management Partners thing. So we're kind of running down two tracks.
Okay.
And I understand that there's some differences here, but I'd rather, I'm concerned about not your personally, but your office's capacity.
Sure.
And I want to make sure we prioritize within that. I might also suggest, not for this year as you're doing this, but as you go forward, that you leave some capacity, because there's always going to be things, whether it's Roberts or cannabis or whatever, there's always going to be things that pop up. And so maybe at the beginning of the year, as you do your work plan, leaving, I don't know what it looks like, 5%, 10% capacity for those things that will happen, might prevent you from having to shuffle around during the year.
Sure.
So those
Makes
are
sense.
my thoughts.
Good. Thank you very much, Councilmember Councilmember Chenier. Councilmember Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my questions are a little bit about capacity as well, because I heard you during your presentation, mentioned that you don't have resources to do certain audits. And so the first question I have is, those audits that you mentioned that we won't be able to do they come in line for the next year?
Yeah.
And do they move to the top, or how do they then come back into the system?
We usually would add them to priority one the following year. So we know what's kind of being considered in the queue, and if there's other priorities, then, you know, potentially they wouldn't make it into priority one, but if there is capacity for it, then they would move into priority one.
And I would imagine after we have this kind of conversation here at Budget and Audit, and then before the full council, that would determine whether or not they would stay in priority one or not. So that answers that question. But then the other piece of it is and I just don't know the answer to this as far as it relates to vendors and the people who we do business with. And I don't know even the number that we have. And I guess my question is, do we proactively do some form of an audit of them, or do we wait for an incident to take place to do that?
Depends. With, for example, when we did the Golden One Center project, the council, I would characterize it as being proactive in engaging some of our partners during that particular project to work with some of the nonprofits that were involved with, for example, the apprentice program, to make sure that we were able to meet those performance metrics for the city and not wait until after the project was complete to then review retroactively and, you know, identify potential shortcomings. So we actually actively worked with them real time during the project to report to the council progress that was being made and help ensure that the metrics were either met or exceeded. And so that would be an example where we would have been more proactive in working with some of our nonprofit partners. In the case of the Roberts family audit that we're doing right now, there was obviously some information that came to the city's attention that created the interest and the need for the city to ensure that its resources were being used appropriately.
And I understand that. I think my question is there anything that we have within our contract with our vendors that allows us to proactively audit them on a yearly or every 2-year basis, or require that they audit themselves and we retain a copy of that audit so that we can understand that our money is being properly spent? Do we have that within our system now?
Most of our contracts have language in it that would allow the city to access their records to be able to verify that they are in compliance with the terms of the contract. And so from that aspect, we would have the right to conduct those types of assessments. Could that language be improved upon? I think that's part of what we're going to be looking at as part of our current engagement. Are our contracts currently being written in a way that puts the city in the best position to be able to do these types of reviews and assessments when the city feels that it's necessary?
Okay. So I think my question specifically is, and I think you're answering it, I just want to make sure I'm hearing it properly.
Sure.
In our current contracts right now, do we require that a vendor have a audit within a period of time specific? Is that required?
Not necessarily, no.
And we are not proactive in auditing all of our vendors on a periodic period of time.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So those are the things, Chair, that I think I would like to really put on the table for discussion, because I think rather than waiting for something to happen, I think we need to be proactive in making sure one way or the other that we receive an audit on the money that's being spent by all of our vendors so that we can understand that it's being spent in the way that it should be spent.
Thank you, Mr. Councilmember Jennings. Assistant City Manager Milstein, I think, has some comments on this matter as well.
Thank you. I think we really want to be mindful of the type of contract that we have. And I think that you, in sort of closing up, talked about when we are giving money to vendors who might be performing a particular service. When it's for goods, And for services, we have the opportunity to not pay them if they don't deliver, and we have taken that opportunity should we need. It doesn't require necessarily an audit or an evaluation function. That is within the terms of all of our contracts, but certainly we can look into where it might be beneficial to the city to add an audit provision. We also have a lot of vendors that are not necessarily repeat customers. We do have a lot that are, and so we have to also make that distinction on when it would be appropriate if it's a service delivery over the long term. And I'll give you an example, our janitorial contract, our uniform contract, they have performance requirements. And those performance requirements in those cases are their audit standards. They're their performance standards. And so they are held to that, and that is our leverage to ensure that they are performing within the bounds of that contract. So it will really be different for each type of contract, and we really want to explore that difference and distinguish between goods and services and length and duration where it's appropriate.
Well, thank you, and I think the two things that I heard here, one from Councilmember Chenier is, let's start off with Councilmember Jennings, is to basically look at a clear policy of when we need some kind of audit requirements in our contracts. And because it is specific, I mean, we have so many contracts in whether it's a private vendor or nonprofit delivering a service or whatnot. I think at least what I'm hearing from the members here on the Budget and Audit Committee is we should have at least some guiding principle about that. For example, we don't ask as part of RFP that they submit their past audit of their business or nonprofit, do we? Is that a standard at all?
It's not a standard, no.
It's not a standard.
Is
so-
it something?
And every organization, I mean, I sit on a number of nonprofit boards. We do either an annual or biannual audit of our standing. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but I think we should explore whether that's something that maybe it's too onerous or not, but it'll give us, shed some light on who we decide to issue a contract to. But I at least that's what I'm understanding here from Councilmember Jennings. And then from Councilmember Chenier is to return back on the discussion on the risk assessment so that we're not being duplicative.
Not the risk assessment.
Not the risk assessment.
Financial
The financial conditions, sorry, the financial conditions, so that we can build upon the work that we've already started on that. And Assistant City Manager Milstein, yes.
The only other thing I want to comment on is Councilmember Chenier asked for a focus on the TOT on Airbnb, and we are adopting a new ordinance tonight. And so I'm going to suggest that perhaps we wait for a time to allow that new ordinance and those requirements to kick in so that we can audit them on, unless we'd like to go back and watch past.
I'm
So,
just wondering if tonight's ordinance, sorry.
oh,
I don't know if tonight's ordinance, how much that would impact, but we could leave it up to you guys.
Yeah.
To take a look at that.
Which I think is the next point here that the committee's discussed is your workload. And I think there is concern about what level of workload, which, you know, when I look at these requests, I think I've heard a number of us ask for these requests too. So when we're looking at your workload, it's not only your recommendations on what we want, but I know many of us have asked for specific audits here on this. So I'll start off by saying I think, one, we should look at I'd like you to, at our Budget Audit Committee, when we start looking at the 2020 and 2021 fiscal year budget, you know, think about, or at least bring the conversation about workload, whether it's increasing an FTE, or do we have more capacity, or what we do. And I know it's causing probably Don in the audience to cringe when I say another FTE, but I do find that the work of your department has helped us improve our effectiveness. So it may be a wise investment to look at that. But I would want to say, okay, this is what we, given the demands that we've asked, this is what's a realistic amount to achieve our audit goals. Second, I do want to look at, when we're looking at contracting out, I would like to see what kind of feedback loop we have in our contracts. If you can audit that in the scope of your audit, look at, do we have checkpoints? You know, where is it a standard that we use on to make sure that if there are things that maybe we can assist with our vendors that we can avoid, say, the ship being steered too long away until the end of the contract. I'd rather have, like, say, some corrected benchmarks if that's the case, if need be. And then on a question on the specific contract audits, and I don't know if we could include it in either the information technology or in the EMS, because the EMS is more about the cost, revenues, and service delivery or effectiveness of the performance, or in the cybersecurity. But there is an issue in my district about cellular technology and emergency response. And so how do we look at the technology aspect of how we communicate with our dispatch units? And is that a technology issue that we need to start looking at sooner than later? So if we can include it in one of those, I don't know if we want to create a full audit on something like this. Your scope is pretty large to begin with. The last thing I want to ask is the audit on cannabis management, business permitting. What is the and cannabis management? What are your timelines for both of those?
We're currently engaged in the permitting aspect, and so we're in the middle of field work as we speak, and that's an audit that we would like to complete and present before the city council in the next couple of months. Given that we got the council's approval to add a cannabis compliance auditor, one of the tasks of that new position will be to put together a program to be more proactive in reviewing and analyzing the aspects of our cannabis efforts so that we can hopefully identify potential areas of risk earlier rather than after they become an issue. And so that would be one of the first tasks of our new position.
Perfect. Good. And I think it might be because I don't think it probably fits in the law and legislation committee purview, but I think it might be helpful if we looked at just maybe at one of our budget and audit committee meetings, what our audit efforts are going to be in this arena, so that we can look at, okay, what are the areas as this industry is growing? It's unique, unlike any other, so that we can have a better picture of, okay, here are the areas we've looked at. This is the process improvement we've achieved here. These are the other areas we maybe should look at as well. So maybe we just have one meeting where we can focus on that aspect of it. So of this industry, and not that I want to add more to Laney's plate on cannabis, but I think it might have us a different focus than we do on the policy development side. Now we can have a retrospective look here as well. So
Sure.
good with that. Anything else? No. All right.
I was just going to mention one thing, if I may. Given that we want to wait for the fiscal analysis from management partners, would it be okay if we schedule this for council after that meeting? That way you will already have at least received and reviewed that information before we have any further discussion on how we feel about the financial fiscal
No, I
analysis.
think it'd be fine. I'd rather come here first.
Come back to budget and audit?
For a discussion to make a recommendation back to council, because we'll have the mayor there at that point.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we don't have another budget and audit meeting scheduled for about 2 months.
Can we look at scheduling one specifically for approving this?
I'm going to suggest that we,
Clerk
maybe
on this.
let's check with the mayor and see how he wants to go about doing that, because I know he's been driving some of the other pieces as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, I need some guidance from the clerk then on how to make this motion to, because this was a motion to bring to council.
Correct.
So we need a motion to return to the
So
budget.
I will move that the auditor's plan gets moved to council with the amendments that we have discussed today.
Sounds good. It's been moved by Councilmember Chenier,
I will second that.
seconded by Councilmember Jennings. If that's clear to the clerk, then all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, measure passes.
Thank you.
That's what I was thinking of, this one.
Oh, this one here.
See,
Okay.
like it says where it is in
Madam Clerk, is that the business of the day?
Sorry.
Unless there are committee comments, we have no other
Any
business.
committee comments? No committee comments?
I have no-
Okay, then we are adjourned at 3:30.